Welcome to my art form.
It's time for Post-Orthodoxy, a show about changing our minds.
Yeah, baby.
With your hosts, Dark and Ainsley Sevier.
Maybe what they believe about reality isn't all of reality.
What?
I know, right?
We're on a mission to have a better time with more people more often.
The question is more like, how do you get there?
Post-Orthodoxy explores strongly held beliefs, how those belief systems divide or connect people, and what might be found beyond those reality bubbles.
Keep calm. Don't lose your head.
I've got a piece of chocolate here with me because I got anxiety about doing this.
Welcome to this neighborhood, neighbor.
Hello. Oh, are we live?
Looks like it.
So exciting.
Just getting us brought up in the window here.
I'm much bigger than you again today. I'm going to scoot back a little bit.
Yeah. I'm going to be very careful with the microphone this week. All right.
Yeah, what ended up happening last week where I just sort of had to like monologue the whole time?
When I put the microphone stand up, the corner has more grabbing space than the edge. And then the little round disc that goes on the turny thing came off.
Yeah.
So it was just a pointy thing. And then I couldn't get the round disc back on the turny thing. And so
it was a whole thing.
I struggled a lot. And you were a champ. Welcome to
I had to talk and talk.
So if you're just tuning into the show, we'd like to warn everybody, viewer discretion advised. We're going to do a little show here, and we're going to talk about some things. And some of the views and opinions expressed here may not be ones that you like or agree with. They may not be ones that future Dark and Ainsley like or agree with either.
And it might not be very comfortable to discuss them, but you can't grow without some discomfort along the way.
Yeah, why are we doing this? Why are you doing this show?
Oh, well, I posted something to the Post-Orthodoxy page this week that I think was definitely a part of my motivation for starting Post-Orthodoxy way on back after our conversation with Anna Shaw, the deconstructing Mormon, on the last episode of Copacetic Conversations. And we transitioned into Post-Orthodoxy. And this quote from Brene Brown really sums up my main motivation for continuing the conversations with this particular path, this particular goal. Brene says, one day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be someone else's survival guide.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of why I do this.
That's a big part for me. And I'm also still learning, but in general for me, especially as a big sister and a person that was raised to be very communal and to be very sharing, anything I learn, I want to pass along to other people that might find it helpful. And so that's I think that's why I do Post-Orthodoxy, is to continue learning and challenging myself, and then making a place where people could find that information if they wanted to. And it's a very judgment-free zone. And so you can decide if you like the information or not. I'm not going to be mad if you don't like some of the information that I share on Post-Orthodoxy.
Right. It's judgment-free for us. Some of the audience members can judge away. Sometimes.
And do.
Usually it's the people who actually don't watch the show are the most judgmental. But anyway,
Weirdly.
welcome to the show.
Yeah.
I'm in Butte, Montana. Ainsley Sevier is in St. Louis. Is it St. Louis, Missouri?
Meet me in St. Louis. It's Missouri.
Sorry. Right.
Yeah. You're doing a really good job of looking at the camera lens today, my dear. I applaud you.
There's a Miami, Oklahoma, but they pronounce it Miami.
Miami?
Yeah.
That's funny. So I'm fresh. I set an alarm for myself today because the daylight looks differently in Missouri than it does in Butte. And
Right.
I've noticed that I have not had any idea that it was 5:30 every day when my sister starts making dinner for all the kids. Also, you and I usually eat dinner around like 8.
Or 10.
So,
Or something, yeah.
yeah. So I was like, better set an alarm. And my alarm went off just as we were unloading like a bunch of half naked kids from the van because we had just been playing at a creek all afternoon.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So I
It's
whipped
that
some
time of
chicken.
year.
It's beautiful. Everything's green and growing. One of the kids did definitely drink some creek water, so we'll see how that sits with him.
All right.
But in general, everybody had a good time.
All right.
That's what I'm fresh off of right here.
So the chat bot is open. If you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, please feel free to join in the conversation. We usually have a special guest on Thursdays, but due to some jangling going down, we are test driving the mobile podcast setup.
Well, and darling, give yourself some credit. This is only your second time running the whole live stream setup yourself. And so I didn't want to throw in, hey, run the whole thing yourself for the first time. And also you're going to have to manage 2 different Zoom windows with 2 different guests and blah, blah, blah. Cause I'm your Zoom guest tonight.
I'm doing good just to get the 2 of us on. And if you're listening out there, maybe somebody can let us know how our volume is. Cause last week our volume was a little compromised.
Yes, I was a little too quiet, and then we were both too quiet, and we're not sure what happened. But we're going to be streaming and having conversations with you guys Mondays and Thursdays until the end of May when we get back home, and we're going to be having in-person guests in the studio for the first time. Very cool lineup of people who have agreed to have conversations with us on Post-Orthodoxy.
Yes. So
how will we decide when season 2 is done?
We get kicked off of another platform, I guess.
And then just celebrate by taking a break?
Go to outer space at that point. I don't know.
Well, they're always coming up with new
Season 2
platforms.
could be like, we'll just, when we come back around to the beginning date of season 2, we'll just roll into season 3, I guess.
Yeah. Or we could do season 2 until, maybe we do like a 10-month season.
And then we take 2 months off and then do the best of.
Yeah, take 2
repeats.
months off, do some cleaning up, clean everything up, and go to Scotland because I hear Scotland just reopened their doors for tourists.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, I'm excited. That'll be cool.
So we have an article.
Mm-hmm.
We can get to that in a minute. We're going to let some people join the show. We just got another person. Hello, viewers. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello, viewers.
If you can hear us, if our volume, can you, if you're watching right now, would you mind tapping a comment into the comment section and let us know if our volume, are we coming across?
Are we coming through loud and clear? So we have Monday night, we had a brief, just sort of a dilly-dally sort of conversation around taboo topics. Things that you're just not supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
And I figure we can use the word taboo topics instead of sacred cow since sacred cow is now considered to be culturally disrespectful.
Right.
So taboo topics.
Isn't that ironic? Is that ironic?
Is it ironic? Well, now I feel as though there's a difference between colloquializing someone's culture, appropriating an important part of someone's culture to be a colloquialism, especially a derogatory colloquialism, such as gypping somebody or sacred cows.
Oh my God, they're doing it again.
There's a difference between doing that, which is in no way honoring the culture, discussing the culture, talking about sharing the culture. It's just taking some of it for my own use.
Right.
There's a difference between that and discussing the sacredness of cows in India, or even discussing the origins of the phrase "a sacred cow."
Right.
Yeah. And so I don't think anything, me personally, as far as I know, I have not encountered anything yet in my life that I think should be off the table to talk about. But I do think that there are healthy and unhealthy, or respectful and disrespectful, or productive and unproductive ways of talking about everything.
Agreed. I think intention is really important.
Mm-hmm.
the spirit in which you are talking about something should, it's not always easy to communicate the spirit in which you are discussing something. Some people, because of our previous understanding of how the amygdala works, some people may just hear something that triggers them and not give a damn about the spirit.
It's true.
In which you're doing it.
And many people bring up conversation topics that they know will be specifically jarring to somebody. And they're like, oh, I'm just talking about it. Or we're just having a fun little chat. Or,
just kidding.
It's just civil discourse. And it's like, if you know that what you're going to talk about is something that person has said they don't want to talk about, or something that might potentially be painful to them, don't rub it in their faces. Be kind.
That means you have to have an awareness of other people in your environment.
Right. Yeah. So after the show on Monday, friend of the show, Glen Southergill, sent me this article from the New York Times about the age of misinformation and how belonging is becoming stronger than wanting to know the truth. I think, like we've said many times, it just goes back to trauma.
Yeah.
We're having a hard time as a society. Yes, even the people in the quote unquote first world, which is also not a way that we should be ranking zones of the planet anymore. That's a whole other show.
I heard that third world and first world and all that is also not appropriate.
Right, because as far as I understand it, it's at its baseline ranking a developed country that has like infrastructure and electricity as if it's better than a country where people still go to the well to get water.
Right.
As if one is better than the other, which is actually just a matter of progression through various known developmental stages of infrastructure, and not necessarily indicative of one place being quote unquote better than the other. I mean, Lord knows we have plenty of starving people in the U.S.
Right.
So the article. Why was I talking about the first world?
Oh, you were talking about the article about misinformation, disinformation. And then after...
Oh, yes. Trauma. A lot of people are saying that like, oh, well, I mean, if you want to talk about trauma, let's talk about like the refugees in Romania being bombed and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, that's traumatized. And they still get up and nurse their kids and cook dinner. And it's like, yeah, like there are known progressions in society, and discussing one kind of trauma does not dismiss another kind of trauma. And as a society progresses through various stages of infrastructure and development, we move from, by and large, physical traumas to emotional and intellectual traumas, just as we move from physical developments such as the water wheel to psychological developments such as now we have schools because we have such good farming techniques that people actually have time to go to school now. And so as we progress away from, in general, having our physical needs being the most important thing to be met, we move into, now I need my emotional needs met. Now I need my intellectual needs met. Right. And each of those stages comes with its own letdowns or traumas. And I think one of the biggest things we're dealing with in the US, at least right now, with this hyperpartisanship is people who just desperately need to know where they stand psycho-spiritually in the realm. They need to have a sense of identity of some kind. We've seen massive breakdowns, for better or for worse, in people's ability to identify with their family, people's ability to identify with their religion, and now even with transportation and stuff, people's ability to identify with the region of the country that they live in. And so I think the hyperpartisanship is partially a product of people needing to have at least something that they can describe themselves as.
Yes. I am of the opinion that partisanship, that tribal identity gets exploited to our detriment.
Yes. I'm not saying it's an entirely good thing that happens.
No, of course.
Yeah.
We're dealing with it. That's why this article, so we friend of the show sent us an article. I saw it, but I didn't read it. And then I started reading it today.
And it was so good.
It's good. It is good. And I didn't get that.
As in, good to talk about.
Yeah, I had to run off, and I didn't get to read the whole article, but I wanted to share it, and I think I want to further develop it. I also want to say, Norm Goodwin last week, at the end of Monday's show, I said I was going to be posting some links about things we were talking about tonight, and I didn't do it.
Oh, no!
Because I'm not really ready to talk about them tonight, but I'll post them at the end of this show, and then maybe we'll talk about them next week. I'm still a little gun shy, to try to explore intellectual ideas when in a hyper partisan atmosphere, because people perceive you as a threat if you disagree with them because of the tribalism that's going on.
Yes, it's a cycle, because you're saying something that doesn't match how I think the world is. Therefore, you're a threat, because I need to think the world is this way, because my group thinks the world is this way, and I need to be safe because of the trauma. It's just...
So, do you want me to read some of this, or do you want to read some of this?
Yeah, go. What stuck out to you?
I'm going to do an intro and not go deep into the scientific studies yet, but I'm just going to do an intro, and then you can stop me. I'm just going to read the first few paragraphs of this article. The article is called... It's from the New York Times, written by a cat named Max Fisher. And the name of the article is Belonging is Stronger Than Facts.
Okay.
The Age of Misinformation. So, and this is coming from the New York Times, which many people will say, oh, they're always spreading misinformation. So this is, we're gonna sort of just saunter in gradually. The byline is social and psychological forces are combining to make the sharing and believing of misinformation an endemic problem with no easy solution. So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs, and then I want to skip ahead to something that I immediately made me want to stop reading the article. One, because of time issues, and two, because I want to dissect it more.
Was it triggering for you?
It was a little triggering. It says, so this is Max Fisher saying, there's a decent chance you've heard at least one of these rumors, all false, relayed to you as fact recently, that President Biden plans to force Americans to eat less meat, that Virginia is eliminating advanced math in schools to advance racial equality, and that
Wait, that Virginia is what?
That Virginia is eliminating advanced math in schools to advance racial equality.
Okay.
And that border officials are mass purchasing copies of Vice President Kamala Harris's book to hand out to refugee children. So these
must all be things that my conservative friends are hearing.
Right.
Because I haven't heard any of those from my liberal friends.
I've been hearing, echoes of it. The Biden meat thing, I've been hearing that, but...
Oh, that's funny. But people have been worried about that for years, that saving the environment was going to mean no more hamburgers.
Right. So he goes on, all were amplified. All these things that he says are false. All were amplified by partisan actors, but you're just as likely, if not more so, to have heard it relayed from someone you know. And you may have noticed that these cycles of falsehood-fueled outrage keep recurring. We're in an era of endemic misinformation and outright disinformation. Plenty of bad actors are helping the trend along, but the real drivers, some experts believe, are social and psychological forces that make people prone to sharing and believing misinformation in the first place, and those forces are on the rise. Quote, why are misperceptions about contentious issues in politics and science seemingly so persistent and difficult to correct? Brendan Nyhan, a Dartmouth College political scientist, posed in a new paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's not for want of good information, which is ubiquitous. Exposure to good information does not reliably instill accurate beliefs anyway. Rather, Dr. Nyhan writes, a growing body of evidence suggests that the ultimate culprits are cognitive and memory limitations directional motivations to defend or support some group identity or existing belief, and messages from other people and political elites. Put more simply, people become more prone to misinformation when three things happen. First, and perhaps most important, is when conditions in society make people feel a greater need for what social scientists call in-grouping, a belief that their social identity is a source of strength and superiority and that other groups can be blamed for their problems.
So this is like the Red Scare.
Yes. It's also...
We are American, not those bad guys.
It's also MAGA, and it's also blue no matter who.
My identity saves me from the other people who are the ones causing all the problems.
Right. As much as we like to think of ourselves as rational beings who put truth-seeking above all else, we are social animals wired for survival. In times of perceived conflict or social change, we seek security in groups, and that makes us eager to consume information, true or not, that lets us see the world as a conflict, putting our righteous in-group against a nefarious out-group.
In order for me to be right and feel safe, someone else has to be wrong.
Right. So I'm going to skip ahead and just read this line where he keeps talking about the hyperpartisanship.
Yeah.
So he says, growing hostility between the two halves of America feeds social distrust, which makes people more prone to rumor and falsehood. I just want to address that line right there, because the notion that there are two halves,
right,
that the partisanship of, let's say, Republicans and Democrats or conservatives and liberals are half and half of the country. I would like to see the data.
Well, we already know that they're not. You can look at voting data.
Yeah, so it's not half of the country. So he's talking about misinformation and how it spreads around. And what he's doing in this article is continuing this misnomer that the country is evenly divided between the red and the blue.
Which is probably not his fault.
What do you mean? Yeah, I'm not saying it's nefarious. I'm just saying that this is the thing that makes me stop reading mainstream news, is because they're perpetuating this idea that we are hyper partisan, but what we're often hearing is a vocal 10% on one side and a vocal 10% on the other side, and somewhere in between, 60 some odd percent of the country are not hyper partisan. They have a feeling, they'll vote for somebody because, Jesus, I got to vote for Biden because look at Trump. That doesn't mean they're hyper partisan. That just means they have crappy choices.
Yes, it's a forced choice.
Yeah.
Look, you have a choice. No, it's a forced choice. We could be having ranked choice voting. We could be having direct democracy, which would actually enable the U.S. to choose their president instead of being forced to choose between two crappy options.
So I want to finish reading the article. We've linked the article in the comments for other people to read. We can have a discussion study group about it later. But once it's hard for me to go once I get one of those derailed parts, because when he says half the country and half the country, I'm like, dude, I guess that's fine for the people who think that they're half the country. But I don't think it's accurate, and I don't think that it's productive to continue this trope that we're evenly divided down the middle. I think it's dumb.
Oh, we're not. Absolutely. I think it's been especially demoralizing and destabilizing for a lot of my blue friends, because they've been laboring under the impression over the last 5 years that half of their neighbors voted for Trump.
Right.
Right. Right. And then they also attach the belief that if one voted for Trump, one must necessarily then be a racist, misogynistic, environment-crushing asshole.
Right.
And that's not true. A lot of Trump voters were people who were going to vote for Bernie, which is something that my blue friends hate hearing.
Cannot believe it.
Cannot. Yeah. Oh, my God. There are many, many, many different reasons why people vote for a president, and very rarely these days do they have to do with them actually liking what that president says he's going to do.
So that's my beef with this article. They're talking about misinformation and hyperpartisanship, and they've continued this thing, and this is what I see all through the mainstream news, is half the country is racist, half the country is Republican, half the country is Democrat, and it's not true. So if you looked at the election results, there are the votes of who voted for Biden and who voted for Trump. Those votes are, I think, only half of the country voted. So of those votes, that's only half the country.
Yeah.
And then when you get down to the votes of how many people voted for this and this, it actually comes down to about 18% for the right and maybe 19% for the left. That's 40%, not even half the country.
Not even half the country.
And of those people that voted, they are not hyper-partisan. They're people that feel like they're doing their duty in a really shitty situation where you got to vote for a couple of clowns. So of that 18% or 19%, how many of those people actually feel strongly about their choice?
And like chose it because it's what they wanted instead of choosing it because it was
the lesser of two evils.
Not what they didn't want.
Yeah. I've been listening to the lesser of two evils trope ever since I was a little kid. Well, I know the choices are crappy, but you got to vote for one. You got to vote for the lesser of two evils. We just keep doing that, and we just keep getting evil. We just keep getting more and more evil. I'm like, why can't we vote for somebody we like? Like, you know, there have been people who've come up, and, you know, I don't want to go down the whole Bernie road because everybody has feelings about that, and that's fraught to even talk about it as a logistical political thing because there's so many feelings about what happened.
Here we go again, not talking about things because people are going to have reactions to it.
So we have time. We can talk about it, I guess. People out there in the audience can participate if they feel like we've gone astray or if they agree. But I find it shocking that what I saw in the 2016 and the 2020 election is this guy, Bernie Sanders, who's sort of considered a radical left, and he's actually like centrist left. People were talked out of voting for him in the primary because of Trump. So they're like, we would like to vote him. We'd like to vote for him. Yeah, go ahead.
It was basically like, we better not vote for Bernie in case not enough people vote for Bernie.
It was one of the dumbest things I ever witnessed.
I watched it happen on Facebook.
Yeah.
It was like, we were so ahead. We were doing it. And I say we, oh my gosh, okay. Here I am identifying with something I feel passionate about. Bernie was ahead and he was doing really well. And I don't know if it was trolls or bots or people's terror that we might actually have something lovely.
I think it was, I think it's pretty easy to say that it was political.
Yeah.
The party went and trumped what the voters wanted, which is what they do election after election after election.
I think people got trolled. I think probably the most likely story is people were hired to join these blue Facebook groups and start the fear rumor that what if not enough people vote for Bernie?
Well, that's what happens.
Which made everybody not vote for Bernie.
That's what happens when one of the candidates in the campaign has billions of dollars to sway people with.
Yeah.
Marley joined the conversation.
Hey, Marley, welcome. Who else is out there? I see about 8 people watching with us right now. We're so happy to have you guys.
Yeah.
I shared a link in the comments to a really awesome video. Well, the name of it, because I can't cross-populate links onto the chat screen, but the name of the video is called Unbreaking America, Solving the Corruption Crisis. And it's by Represent Us. Extra bonus points. It's Jennifer Lawrence talking in the video.
Right.
And they talk about 3 things that the U.S. could slowly change from local government to the federal level that would take care of almost all the corruption in government right now. Ending, not gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking of whatever the one is where they stand up and talk a long time, filibustering.
Yeah.
So ending gerrymandering, ranked choice voting, and getting secret money out of politics. Nobody should be able to donate to politics secretly. And so they're like, if we can get this stuff out of our politics on the local level, it has been proven time and time again, like with the civil rights votes and gay marriage, that it will eventually become such a turning point locally that the federal government will take it on.
Well, going back to the point of this article is that we're so hyper divided that we can't focus on the local because we're terrified by the scary, as Matt Taibbi,
scary president thing.
As Matt Taibbi likes to say, hate incorporated. That's how he has defined the mainstream media, because that is the business model. The business model is we must be afraid and we must hate those other guys because they're evil and they're trying to kill you.
And it makes us buy stuff.
It makes us buy stuff, and it makes us tune in because, the kids building the sandcastle out in the playground, and then those two kids fighting. Who's going to get more attention? Not the kids building the sandcastle.
Norm Goodwin is tuning in from Florida.
Yep, Florida.
Cool. Thanks, Norm. So you're saying you feel like you let Norm down after Monday's show?
Oh yeah, I was going to send some links and I didn't do it because I thought I was ready to launch back into the how do I say I have to find out code words to talk about the pandemic, because then suddenly like some Bulgarian fact checker is going to send me a thing saying, oh, you said a thing. So yeah, but talking about, we've had this narrative around the pandemic for a year. There's some data out there that we could be looking at and listening to, but people just seem to have gotten addicted to the memes in their meme stash that they started collecting 9 months ago and can't adapt to new information about where we are with this whole story. I do want to address that, but I want to prepare myself a little more before I wade in, because I don't want to do it half-assed.
Maybe we should, back when we were talking more about the corruption at KBMF, we were considering getting a kitchen timer and just setting it for 5 minutes and calling it a day after 5 minutes was up, so we didn't go overboard on that topic. And maybe that would be a good idea with our conversations around SARS-CoV-2 and the vaccines and the social and governmental responses to these events, is just set a timer and be like, we're going to talk about it this much and then we're going to stop. I don't know. Maybe that would be a good solution. I think anytime we do bring up talking about it again, people are always wondering like, but why do you have to talk about it? I should say our blue friends in general give me the reaction of like, why do you feel like you have to talk about it though? And I would say much the same as I've been trying to explain to my parents when I try to bring up like, it feels as though something went wrong. People are suffering, and I feel as though we need to talk about it because it feels as though something has gone wrong, and I have the ability to research what has happened and research the effects of what has happened and look into the data myself from reliable sources who are smarter than me, who have provided the data on the internet for me to see and evaluate. And so when, why do we need to talk about SARS-CoV-2 and the vaccines and the sociopolitical responses to these events? Because it feels as though something is not quite right. And it has felt that way for me since late summer last year. We were very on board with sanitizing your groceries and flattening the curve so that hospitals didn't get overwhelmed until we figured out what was going on with SARS-CoV-2. And then as the lockdowns and the flattening the curve motif went longer and longer, we began to see suffering in our communities because of those measures. People being stuck at home with someone that is abusive to them, people being stuck at home alone and having mental health crises, children being stuck at home and not having food because they were only getting food at school, elderly people dying without being able to say goodbye to their loved ones, moms having to have babies alone in a hospital ward without their loved ones with them there while they were having their baby. We began to see more and more I feel like something is not quite right because of the sociopolitical measures being enacted in reaction to SARS-CoV-2. And so for me, the motivation at that point in like June, July of last year was like, I need to find out for myself if SARS-CoV-2 is actually so dangerous as to justify all this other suffering. We've all seen the zombie movies.
Yeah.
If there are actually zombies wandering the streets, it's totally better to stay inside and go hungry a little bit. And that's what I started. I was like, there's so much suffering happening because of the reaction to SARS-CoV-2 that I want to find out for myself, and then hopefully for my friends and loved ones who might be interested in that information, whether or not this suffering because of the reaction to SARS-CoV-2 is justified by the potential suffering from being exposed to SARS-CoV-2.
So I didn't start an egg timer, but I think we can do 5 minutes because I just posted. I think we can do it. I just posted some links because you're saying what I'm trying to say, which is there's information out there. There's different narratives. There's different aspects to the pandemic narrative, and I would like to understand it better. And sometimes it's people, including myself, sometimes will ignore the evidence of their own eyeballs and earballs if it's at odds with the groupthink because it's alienating and dangerous. So I don't want to ignore things because it's unpopular. That's kind of the whole point of post-orthodoxy. So there's this cat named Reiner Fulmick. He's a attorney. I talked about it last week. This is the video. It keeps getting yanked from different places, but this is a video. I just looked at it. It's still up. He's an attorney talking about the origin of the pandemic narrative. And he's saying it started in Germany. It started with a particular cat and the WHO and the German government who declared the pandemic. So somebody declared it. And he's
WHO has the WHO has the global power to declare a pandemic has started, and they are the only ones that have the global power to declare a pandemic has ended. So
this cat Reiner is saying there's some problems with the way we went about it, and I'm like, I'm open to hearing that story, but I would like other people aside from me to look at that video and look. There's a transcript, and if you can find the transcript online. I have it. I don't know if it didn't hyperlink. So I'm not putting it in the comments, but you can find the transcript, and the transcript might actually be on that video. You can find the transcript of what he's saying, so you can just scroll through and find the pertinent points. It's a 40-minute video. It's an investment. But
why should people want to make that investment? Why would people bother?
Well, that's because I'd like to know. I feel that the story is not the full story. The stuff that I'm seeing on Fox, the stuff that I'm seeing on MSNBC, the stuff that I'm hearing from my friends and family, what I'm seeing on Facebook, seems to have. There's a basic premise that feels at odds with information that I've seen. And I'm not, I would like to see this guy Reiner. I would like somebody to be able to tell me if this guy actually might be onto something. What he's saying is the way this has been handled. He's saying that he's one of 500 lawyers, talked to over 100 different doctors who are all concerned about the way things are going down. He's saying that a year later, the mask and the lockdowns did not significantly curb the death rate. The death numbers. It might have changed how it happened, but the numbers, those things didn't change the numbers. And I'm like, well, that seems like some information worth listening to. And I'll tell you why I'm really hot on this.
Let me rephrase that for you.
Yeah, say it.
What these doctors and scientists are saying, and what my research was already showing me as I watched the numbers from various health organizations and health departments over the course of the fall and winter, is that lockdowns and masks did not change the amount of people who were going to die.
Right.
The same amount of people have died percentage-wise of each population, whether that country did strict lockdowns and masks or not. They may have died over a much longer period of time because it took a lot longer for people to be exposed to the virus so that the virus could say who was going to live or die. But it did not change the eventual amounts of deaths in the end.
Yeah, what they're saying is that the lockdowns helped in one respect where pods of the virus didn't move on to other pods as fast. But it eventually moved on to the other pods. That's what
viruses do.
Virus is going to virus is one of our catchphrases from last year, and it did. And this is the reason I'm interested in this is because we've talked about this a number of times. We politicize the mask more so than the lockdowns. We politicize the mask so that only Republicans don't want masks and only Democrats do, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And my concern is if there was a virus that disproportionately affected people who are not proportionally being affected by this virus. I'm talking about high school kids, babies, young adults. If there's a virus that came down that was like some of these other viruses that we've seen that had the potential to be a quick spreader and a quick killer, because of the way this was handled, we are doomed the next time it happens. Because
we have to say it, Dark. We have to say the young and healthy, because the original definition for a pandemic in the WHO, when the WHO used to call a pandemic, the original definition was something that spread widely and disproportionately affected the young and healthy. It's understood in the medical and scientific community that new health events affect people who are already sick or infirm in some kind of way more than people who are quote unquote young and healthy.
Yeah.
It's been long-term understood that's an unfortunate thing that happens. And the WHO changed its definition of what counts as a pandemic in order to call this a pandemic. They just called it something that spreads a lot.
So that's what's covered. That's what's covered in Reiner's video. Is he talks about that. He talks about how that got changed, and in his perspective. And again, this is not something I'm saying is the absolute truth. This is something that I would like to know if there's some truth to it, and I would like to have other people help me figure this out. From the evidence that I've seen from doctors on the internet, from Stanford professors on the internet,
from the Oxford Center for Evidence-Based Medicine,
which is on the internet,
which you can find on the internet.
Yeah, what they're saying is that the PCR test, it was a PCR. This is what Reiner's catchphrase is: it's a PCR pandemic. Is that the test doesn't tell you if you actually have a live virus, because it was never designed to tell you if you have a live virus. And so if you have a test that gives you up to 90% false positives, it's going to look like there's a pandemic. Or it's going to look worse than the actual number of people getting sick, the actual number of people dying. So
we've never before called people sick when they were not actually presenting symptoms.
Right.
This is the first time that we've been calling people as if they're sick when they are only testing positive for having that genetic material in them, as if, and I think to me, that's one of the most insidious things about this recent medical, scientific, socio-political scaremongering thing that's happened over the last year, is that we're like de-educating people by giving them the impression that you can avoid encountering a virus on the planet. We cannot be bubble boys. We cannot avoid encountering a virus on the planet. We will all eventually encounter this virus, and encountering it and having it in your system does not make you sick.
Right. So I posted these links. So these are some resources that I found, and this is what I like to do on the show, which is find some resources. If people say, hey, that was totally debunked 2 weeks ago, I want to know it. And this is how I'm finding these things out. If this has been debunked, please let me know. There's another link that I posted. This is a link from the BMJ, which is a website intended for healthcare professionals. So it wasn't intended for me.
Which you can find on the internet.
Yeah, it's the BMJ. This is like some medical journal that's been going on for 100 and some odd years. And it says COVID-19, highest death rates seen in countries with most overweight populations. So I wanted to read a couple of things from this because I think this is interesting data. And it says, taking data from over 160 countries, the report found linear correlations between a country's COVID-19 mortality and the proportion of adults that were overweight. There's not a single example of a country with less than 40% of the population overweight that has high death rates, which is over 10 per 100,000. The report says, similarly, no country with a death rate over 100 per 100,000 had less than 50% of their population overweight. Vietnam, for example, had the lowest death rate from COVID-19 in the world, 0.04% out of 100,000. And the second, not percent, 0.04 per 100,000. And the second lowest levels of population overweight at 18.3%. The UK has the third highest death rate globally, 184 deaths per 100,000. And the fourth highest prevalence of overweight at 63.7%. The United States has the next highest death rate. So people are like, why is the death rate so high in America? It's because Trump. And this is another way to look at it.
Correlation or causation. We don't know, but you can know more than we're being told right now.
There's different data than just Trump, why we are all dying. And this data is saying because we're an unhealthy country and our immune systems are compromised, and people with a compromised immune system don't fare well with the virus.
And the same thing is happening right now in India. Unfortunately, they're seeing a vast spike of SARS-CoV-2 related deaths. And a lot of that is due to the massive levels of pollution and poverty in India. People don't have access to any healthcare in large portions of the country and are completely already inflamed all the time in their immune systems, and especially in their lungs, by the insane amounts of pollution in India.
It seems like rather than locking everybody down, see if we can take some lessons away from how we did things. Rather than locking everybody down, which doesn't seem to, the virus is going to get the people that it's going to get, apparently. This is what the data is showing. And the lockdown may delay it. But it seems like there might be an approach to take care of the people who we found to be most at risk. People with comorbidities, people of a certain age.
Yeah.
But what we did was we hobbled the economy, closed businesses, people are losing their houses.
We completely changed how...
It amplifies stress. Yeah. It amplifies stress. Stress is not good for your immune system.
It's inflammatory.
It's inflammatory. So that seems like a lesson to walk away with. Also, the same thing, unfortunately, about masks. Masks have a place, but not in the way that we were using them politically. That didn't seem, from the data, to have curbed the amount of people who died.
No.
From the data.
And so why are we still poking this bear?
Because let's say another virus comes along. We need to do a post-mortem on how we handled this, because if another virus comes along that is more dangerous than this one, they did a little Chicken Little with this virus. They basically said it's going to be the zombie apocalypse and we're all doomed. And it wasn't as bad as we were told it might be. So people have lost trust in their government, in their medical professionals, in their communities. And with that loss of trust, how are you going to advise people to do something if something more serious comes along? So that's why I'm doing it. Because I feel like there may be more viruses coming along. And if we are more stressed out than we were the first time, if we're more divided, if we're more distrustful, that's a recipe for a big disaster. So the reason I'm still doing this is I'm concerned for folks. That's why I'm doing it.
I feel as though it's worth continuing to discuss SARS-CoV-2 data and breaking down our sociopolitical response to the new virus on the planet, because I still see a lot of suffering from how this was and is still being handled. And I think where I see suffering, I want to seek the knowledge necessary to alleviate suffering. And sometimes the suffering cannot be alleviated. When you have cancer and the doctors have deemed it possible that if you do chemotherapy and radiation, you could live longer and see your children graduate from college and get married, you go through hell in order to kill the cancer. that suffering is deemed necessary, the suffering of chemotherapy and radiation, in order to survive cancer and live to see your children grow to an older age. However, I've seen too much evidence over the last year that the suffering currently being experienced was not necessary to save people from SARS-CoV-2. Now, I've also found that the people who most vocally support masks and lockdowns, school closures, and isolation are people who are not suffering from those things very much. Not to say that they didn't have a hard year only being around their husband and kids, not to say that it wasn't embarrassing and giving them acne and frustration having to remember the mask and all that sort of thing. But in general, those are the people who are the loudest supporters of lockdowns, isolation, and mask measures. And I think it's important when I'm a person that's not suffering very much to always be keeping an eye out that someone else may be suffering.
Right.
And that I might be able to do something about it.
So I just posted another link. This is from the National Library of Medicine, from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, pubmed.gov. So I guess this is a government site, and I just posted a link to this article, assessing mandatory stay-at-home business closure effects on the spread of COVID-19.
Okay.
So it has the abstract, it has the methods on how they came to it, and it comes up with the results and the conclusions. And I'll just read the conclusions. And this is the very beginning of the paper. They go way into all the data below. And that's why I posted the link so you yourself can dive into the data. It says the conclusions were, while small benefits cannot be excluded, we do not find significant benefits on case growth of more restrictive NPIs, which is non-pharmaceutical interventions. Similar reductions in case growth may be achievable with less restrictive interventions. So what they're saying is the benefits of the lockdowns were negligible. And we might be able to find some better options. But we, as a culture and friend groups and political identity, have not come to the come to Jesus moment where we said, yeah, I guess the lockdowns were a bad idea. The way they were implemented and how they were implemented was a bad idea. There's going to be more harm than good caused. And this is from a government website, whatever. I think this might, I don't know if this is England government or the US government, but it's the National Library of Medicine. So, I mean, this is what we were talking about last year. This is from April 5th. So fairly recent. And again, they have charts and figures and all the resources of how they came to this data. And this data may change as we go. We may find out that lockdowns were the best damn thing that ever happened. But at this point, the data is saying not so much.
Well, there's a bit of a catch-22.
But that's a political statement. If I say that to my friends who are hyper politically partisan and invested in that narrative as a part of their political tribal identity, if I say that, I will be attacked. I will be discredited. They will say, fuck you, I'm not talking to you because you're a denier. The government is saying what I am saying.
It must just be the bad part of the government.
Yeah, the National Center for Biotechnology Information. I don't know. Maybe this is a World Economic Forum front. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
There's a bit of a catch-22, unfortunately, in society, a very nice, tidy little package that makes it very difficult to speak with even intelligent friends in the blue team about the mask use or the lockdown use. Now, if you actually encounter a friend who's willing to get into the data with you and go through things like this website that I posted, that tracks coronavirus data so that you can see how many people out of 100,000 have died over time in various countries, then you can maybe have a productive conversation with them. But most people say, when you bring up something like Hawaii had no influenza deaths this year. They'll be like, well, that's because of the masks. And then you're like, well, then why do we still have SARS-CoV-2 deaths? And they're like, well, because not enough people wore their masks. And unfortunately, what that does is it creates a cycle where you can never have a discussion about it, because it is impossible for us to prove how many people would or wouldn't have died.
So that's the moment of reasonable doubt. That should be a moment of reasonable doubt for some people.
Because of this beautiful little thing that's been created, it's not an introduction of reasonable doubt.
So it wasn't just Hawaii.
It's completely improvable. It's completely improvable what they're saying. But it answers itself in a circle over and over again. It's circular reasoning.
So Hawaii, there's a number of places. I think it was England. I don't want to say without actually having the data in front of me, but a number of governmental websites are stating that nobody died of influenza this year.
Which is something we should be wondering about.
That should be something I think we should wonder about.
Not saying, well, I guess it's all fake and we're just being manipulated. No.
That's the moment of reasonable doubt where you're like, okay.
We should just wonder.
So like my thinking goes, well, maybe those deaths, because I don't think influenza just disappeared magically. If it did, Jesus, tell me how it happened. Great, we got rid of influenza somehow. If that's the case, then great. But I haven't seen that we've gotten rid of influenza. They just said we didn't have any cases. And that we had all these cases of coronavirus, which we learned earlier on the PCR test. The PCR test
is not an accurate way of measuring active infections with a virus.
It couldn't tell you if it was influenza or the virus or rhinovirus or coronavirus. It couldn't really distinguish. It just said you got something.
Which it tells you on the CDC website that that's the case.
So that to me is like, I don't know, I don't want to call it a smoking gun, but that to me is like a real head scratcher. I'm like, that seems to be something that we should be talking about. It's something I can point to and say, the influenza went away because of the mask, but SARS-CoV-2 didn't. So what is going on with this virus that it gets through a mask in a way that the influenza can't? It doesn't make any sense. This is why I need smarter people than me to help me understand how that is a real thing that we're just walking around going, yeah, that makes sense. No influenza, yeah, because of the mask. It doesn't.
I think because
breaks my brain a little bit.
The people, I mean, to me, my explanation to myself is the people that perpetuate this story that we don't have influenza because people wore masks, but we still have SARS-CoV-2 because not enough people wore masks. The people that perpetuate that, to me, are not suffering masks and lockdowns enough to wonder why that doesn't make sense. They were suffering something else, and the masks and lockdowns narrative alleviated that suffering in some kind of way, which is where we get our oblique connection to the politicization of the mask. There were a lot of people in the blue team that were suffering Trump's presidency so much that having a new cultural identity to latch onto to prove that they were not Trump and to know who was not Trump, the mask, if I see you wearing a mask, you are not Team Trump, I feel safer now. That alleviated suffering for a lot of people. It was literally like, now I can walk in, it's like your badge to get into the speakeasy bar or the Scarlet Pimpernel under your collar that you're going to be saved from the guillotine in France. It was suddenly a badge of knowing like, oh, I can probably feel safe around that person. I can probably feel safe around that person. And those people feel relieved of some kind of suffering because of the mask thing. And therefore, they will continue to go through the suffering of the lockdowns and masks because it's not as bad as what they were suffering before, while denying that we need to do any investigation into the other people who are suffering horribly from masks and lockdown procedures and et cetera.
What do you mean people are suffering from masks and the lockdown? What do you mean by that?
Well, so for instance,
I'm playing devil's advocate.
I understand. Training young, toddlers and little children that they need to wear a mask. Otherwise, they might kill their grandma, or they might kill someone else's grandma, or they might kill their best friend who's struggling with leukemia.
That could set somebody up for some trauma.
It could set somebody up for some trauma. Children who were raised during the lockdowns who now have massive social phobias and feel generally unsafe around adults who are not wearing masks because of the kind of culture that they were raised in at home, that masked people are safe people and unmasked people are unsafe people. That's another kind of massive social trauma we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of decades and generations. And those are just like the soft traumas. Right. I've already mentioned several hard traumas that we're seeing results of already, like massive spikes in people going to therapy, which is a good side effect because everybody should be talking to someone else over the course of their life to get some side opinions and a more objective eye on the issues that we go through day by day. But it is indicative of so much more suffering that people who would not typically be seeking out mental health care are seeking out mental health care. We've had massive spikes in suicide hotline phone calls, massive spikes in overdose deaths, and we're going to be seeing more over time. Not to mention already knowing that a certain number of school lunches are given out every week, and now those lunches are not going to anybody. And there's not much that CPS can do when they're not allowed to do home visits anymore to ensure that these children are getting food. We've had more abuse victim cases coming to hospitals because people are trapped at home with their abusers. These are the hard traumas and the sufferings of the lockdowns and isolation.
So, when you say that people are like, well, I feel safe because you're wearing a mask and I feel endangered because you're not wearing a mask. These are the same people that were like, just stay home. And as a person who's done the starving artist trip for my entire life, that's not an option for a lot of people.
No.
And the tone deaf, like the word privilege gets thrown around a lot in a lot of different ways these days. But to be able to say, just stay home, when most people are a paycheck away from living on the street.
Yeah.
Is so, I don't want to say cruel, but it feels cruel if you're somebody who doesn't know how they're going to survive now that McDonald's is closed down.
It's people who are unaware how much of the U.S. lives in poverty.
We saw that with Elizabeth. I see the same thing. Like, I don't want to cast aspersions too broadly, but the people who were really impressed with Elizabeth Warren, fine candidate, were crushed when she got 0 delegates.
Surprised.
They were crushed. They were like, she makes more sense than everybody else. What is wrong with the system? I'm like,
she's like Bernie, but a woman.
Yeah, there are more people who have dropped out of college than have bachelor's degrees. And those people are probably not in your Facebook group. So they don't speak that language. She's not speaking to those people.
Because of how defensive and protective people have gotten over the last 5 or 6 years, I should say people on the left have gotten very defensive and protective of themselves and their groups over the last 5 or 6 years. They have begun to allow themselves to just cut off any friend that was not part of that belief system. And the algorithm will show you, Facebook algorithm will show you whatever keeps you on Facebook the longest.
Right.
For some people, that's funny animal videos or quotes from their friends who have babies, whatever keeps you scrolling. But for a lot of people, it's political things. For some people, what keeps you scrolling on Facebook is seeing political stuff that makes you angry and excited, and that's what you comment on. And so the algorithm knows to show you more of that stuff. But for a lot of people, what keeps them scrolling and on Facebook longer is almost what seems like should be a positive thing, which is positive political content, progressive social issues. You comment on those things, you're encouraging your friends, and then the algorithm shows you more of that because that's what keeps you scrolling longer. And then pretty soon you have no idea that there are millions and millions and millions of other people around you that are not having the experience that you're having in the US.
So bringing it back to the original article that we posted for the New York Times, the article written by this guy, Max Fisher, Belonging is stronger than facts. The age of misinformation. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the article, because even though I got derailed when he said half of the country this and half of the country that, which is like, it really feels like, dude, get caught up with the story. Like that's part of the misinformation, is that we're just divided down the middle. It's so, find me that information. Show me where half the country is partisan left and half the country is partisan. We can't find it, but this guy's talking about
that's not the case.
He's talking about misinformation, and he does it in the article, talking about the spread of misinformation, and he misinforms us by continuing this trope that we're divided down the middle, and it's not true. So I don't want to write off the entire article and all the research that he did and the references to very wise academics who put a lot of work into the data that he's drawing from. But
the Lord knows I don't know everything already.
No. So this is why we keep talking about coronavirus, and this is why we keep talking about politics, because in the age of social media, we do hyper bubble ourselves into people who agree with us. And I think it's really dangerous. And the coronavirus, the pandemic narrative has put that bubbling on steroids. And I don't know how much longer we can do that, because what happens is reality, like sanity, this is the definition of sanity, right? Sanity is majority accepted reality. There have been, like, for a while, everybody thought the world was flat, and that was a sane thing to do. Now we think people who think the world is flat are insane, because that is not the majority accepted perception. So right now this idea of half and half is not true. We have many, many, many little bubbles. And that's why people get surprised by QAnon, because, like, where do they come from? Outside your bubble. There's a lot of them, probably more than you. So, so in order to be sane, there has to be some majority accepted reality, and we're losing that. We're losing that with social media, because you can find a bubble that makes you feel comfortable, that makes you feel like you're with sane people. But if there's no overriding sanity, agreed reality, then we're just a bunch of pods of insane people
fighting each other.
Yeah. And that seems, I don't know how we stem that or reverse that. I guess that's why we're doing post-orthodoxy. We're stumbling towards trying to get people to, somebody asked me, like, what is your intent of the show? I'm like, I got to where I am in the world to not be a hyper terrified partisan person, because some people were like, hey kid, look over here. What the hell is that? Oh, it's something outside my bubble that actually makes sense. And there's other people that, I just want to leave marks on a trail for people who have this sneaky feeling that maybe the stories that they keep hearing that all their friends are on board with may not be the full story. That's all I'm trying to do.
We are creating an outpost in the Borderlands. We are not the only people having these kinds of conversations, but it's very important to us to try to share information with people and to start trying to have a better time with more people more often.
We've come past the hour.
Darling, it was so lovely to see your face and hear your voice, and I'm so excited that you're going to be joining me in Missouri shortly. Missouri. Yes, it's so nice knowing we're leaving our home in capable hands while we're away.
So what's the arc? What did we walk away with? This article, I want to read more. I want people to help me understand whether or not I should listen to Reiner Fulmick or not. Because he's like he's not just one guy. He's a part of a massive group of people that are saying the damage that is being caused, as he's calling it, crimes against humanity. He wants to start a kind of, Nuremberg trial.
Class action lawsuit.
Class action lawsuit, but like a Nuremberg trial, because the Nuremberg trials could not use the regular court system because the regular court system were Nazis. So they had to find a way to have like the attorneys and groups had to say, we have to take this case out of the calcified, biased, partisan, corrupt system and create a new temporary court system to set a new bar for behavior.
Parallel institution.
And that's what he's trying to do with this, is saying we have to get out of the partisan stuff because you can't have a sane conversation about the pandemic narrative because it immediately goes into conservative or liberal.
Norm Goodwin shared a good delineation that he's been chewing on recently. He says, I read that the Democratic Party subscribes mostly to the mother or nurturing mode, and Republicans follow the father or strict model. Problems arise when the wrong model is applied to any situation, such as using the strict father model towards immigration and welfare, and the nurturing mother attitude being applied to child abuse and violent criminals.
Right.
That's an interesting way of thinking of the two parties.
There's this cat named Aleister Crowley, who was like a Western mystic. And in 1904, he channeled a book where he said, in the 20th century, we're going to be moving more towards people being less binary. We're going to be more amused by betting games and sports. We're going to be like entertaining ourselves more and becoming less serious people. And he said, you know, the ages that we've gone through if you look at old history, the idea is that a lot of tribal cultures were maternal in nature.
Yeah.
And the world was perceived as a mother that gave birth to us. And then you got into the sort of Judeo-Christian paternal world, and it became the punishing father started dictating these cultures. And he was saying, so what happens when the mom and the pop get old? The kids have to come forward. And so like his point was that we've done the maternal thing, and now we've done the paternal thing.
And now we're not going to play.
We're not going to go back to the maternal thing. We have to birth ourselves. We have to be independent of these parental systems and grow ourselves into being able to think for ourselves and make choices for ourselves outside the orthodoxies, outside the dogmas. We have to actually say, you know what, my mom's gone crazy or my dad's gone crazy, and I have to figure out how to live in the world on my own. And unfortunately, what's happening is this is the sort of insane, drunken, paternal phase of the father age, where
what you're talking about is humans actually being able to think beyond my 80-ish year life experience to the more broader human experience that's going on over like 300 or 400 or 500 years.
Right. So he said we're in the age of Horus. This is the beginning of the age of Horus, which is where what do you do when you're not yet an adult, but you're weaned from your parents? You experiment. You run around, you try things, you make mistakes, you discover things, you build new paradigms. And so that's what rather than fighting the system, I've already gone through my personal journey of dealing with my personal mother and my personal father, and I God bless them. But I don't go to them for advice anymore. And we have to find a way to stop going to the authorities for advice because they're drunk and insane, in my perspective.
Right. Well, dear, shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, thanks everybody for participating and being a part of the show. We like doing this, and I'm really excited that we've launched season 2, that we're moving forward, that we're learning the new technology here to give you a better viewing and listening experience. And soon the website will come. I have some friends that keep saying, we want to support your show. How do we support your show? So we've spent a year on figuring out how
many things
to answer that question.
Yeah.
And so stay tuned. Soon we'll have our website launch, and then we're going big time. So Thank you all the people who've been in our little club, our little club of cognitive liberty, or the attempt towards cognitive liberty. I would like to grow the club a little bit. And I'm glad that we have these steady people who join with us on the early phase of the journey.
And thank you to all the lurkers. We appreciate you.
Yeah, we're going to be doing this from the road next Monday at 5 o'clock Montana time, and we're going to see how that looks.
Yeah.
So
right.
We're going to do 2 weeks of on the road episodes, and then when we come back in June, we will resume our Monday freestyle sessions and Thursday focused guest interview conversations. So,
True.
Thanks for being a part of the show, and thanks for participating in the conversation.
Thanks, everybody.
Do I push a button now?
Yeah, do it.
I should have had this on there when I said all that so I could just... Here, what if I just go back to the startup thing?